Mahesh Nandurkar, Head of Research and MD Jefferies India joining in. Mahesh, we always love our conversations with you, so thank you for your time to us here at NDTV Profit. I want to start with a bit of an overview of how you're seeing the situation unfold right now from an Indian perspective. It's a tale of two markets, really. If you see it externally, a lot of gloom and doom, West Asia crisis, crude, etc., all of that looking very difficult. If you look at what you're hearing from the ground, from companies, especially in the mid and small cap space, they're talking about a different story. What are you seeing?
First of all, thank you for having me here, Tamanna. Always a pleasure. So looking at the overall market, yes, I mean, I think you hit the nail right in the head. The macro environment doesn't really look that great. Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, the higher crude price, Iranian war situation, but also one other emerging worry, which is actually a global worry, but applies to India as well, which is that of this El Nino and what it means for yeah, the inflation, the global inflation, the Indian food inflation, etc. as well. So yeah, so the macro situation is not really that great, but at the same time, the bottom-up numbers, the result season that we have just seen concluding um, for the March quarter was actually quite good and much better than what many people were fearing. And as you mentioned, some of the mid caps and small caps have done well, but also broadly speaking, I would say the old economy, the asset-heavy sectors, the hard assets have generally been doing well. So while the macro situation may not be that great, and therefore the market outlook as a whole may not be that great, but there are always a lot of good opportunities in specific stocks and sectors.
You know, where are you seeing those opportunities, Mahesh? There is a broad sense that, sooner or later this West Asia crisis will end. There will be some kind of an agreement between US and Iran, opening of the Strait of Hormuz. Is that going to see a huge upsurge in the Indian markets, or that's not really a situation that you see happening?
Yeah, so the thing is, I think the market is already building in to some extent that the possibility that you spoke about, that is the consensus expectation. That's what everybody expects. And that's also the oil market is expecting as well. And that's the reason why you're seeing the oil prices, hovering at about $93, $94, as we speak. Also, the markets are, also, I mean, the global markets have actually doing reasonably well. Indian market have been weak, but they have from the recent bottoms they have moved up. So what you mentioned is really what everybody's expecting, and so to that extent, when let's say a formal conclusion of an agreement happens in the West Asia, you will probably see the crude falling from the current levels as well. We should see some rupee appreciation. We should see the Indian markets also moving up. I'm not so sure there will be like a huge market upsurge because, as I mentioned, to some extent that optimism is captured in as we speak. But yes, definitely a few percentage point of uptick should happen. For the broader market, and what should be encouraging to see is that even the rupee, in my view, should also see a bit of a pullback up on the positive side.
Mahesh, good morning. Neeraj here. What we are also seeing is that individual news flows are now really taking market or specific stocks higher because there is no market-wide push coming in, and therefore specific themes are being played out, right? I mean, Zenix is a case in point, but that's relevant. But the belief that, for example, that the US issues for the Adani Group will get resolved led to the benchmark stock moving from 1800 to 3000, but a lot of others have rallied 50% at a point of time when the Nifties remain flat, right? Where are those cohorts where you see pockets of opportunity in India, keeping in mind that FIs may not necessarily come in the next few days, weeks, months?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm not so optimistic about the FPIs coming into the markets in any meaningful way
Got it.
in the near future, because I think, yeah, we might see one trigger in the form of the West Asia resolution. But beyond that, I think what really is weighing on the minds of global investors is this whole AI narrative and the AI trade that is still the most dominant global investment theme. and which is driving money into some of the AI specific stocks and countries such as the US, the Korea, Taiwan, etc. And unfortunately, India doesn't really feature, in that list, as of now. Where are those pockets, Neeraj? As you rightly mentioned, several of the large, I'm sorry, several of the large caps are not really, performing. In fact, I would say that there are certain sectors like the IT, the consumer staples. I would say, some other sort of large cap names in the telecom space, etc., have also not been doing well. And there are some obvious concerns, in all of this. Rather surprisingly, banks, which I think, from the bottom-up perspective, looks like a pretty reasonable sector, but that's, also not doing that well, from the market perspective. And once again, I would say the primary reason is the continuous FPI selling. Because from the valuation wise and from the bottom-up fundamental perspective, the banking sector actually is looking pretty good. So I would look to be positioned into that sector. But to your other broader point, Neeraj, on the mid caps and small caps, I think there are several of these bottom up ideas that are looking very interesting. We've been extremely positive, on this whole power sector chain or power sector theme, which starts right from the electric sort of utilities, but then the equipment suppliers, and then the financiers and the whole solar equipment chain. So there is a whole bunch of stocks and subsectors that fall within that theme, and that theme is also seeing a positive trigger in the form of the power sector demand going up. And my sense is that the El Nino, which is, while it's going to be a bigger concern from a macro standpoint, but that's a huge positive for power sector demand. And therefore, I feel that this whole power sector chain, which has already done well on the markets, but I think it can continue to do well even from here on for the rest of the year. And I do see a possibility of power demand actually surprising on the positive side. And while the current numbers that people are expecting are maybe like 5 to 6% demand growth for this year, but could be much higher than that. So that is definitely one space, and which has a lot of large caps, but several of the mid caps and small cap ideas as well coming in from this theme. And as I said, the other theme that one should be focusing on is this whole hard asset as the theme, which is also to some extent a global theme as well, because in the environment where the global inflation, the inflation in India is likely to go up from where we are, that is usually is also considered to be a great news for some of these hard assets. Because, and when I say hard assets, apart from the power theme, I mean there are players like the ports, the airports, I would say even real estate for that matter, hospitals, those are the kind of, names where the businesses are built around, large physical assets, and some of those stocks and sectors should also be doing quite well.